Imagine you order a pizza, wait 100 years for the delivery guy, and end up getting a bill for renting the entire planet. That is pretty much what 14th century geopolitics looked like. One bureaucratic typo or someone's inflated ego turned entire generations into historical cannon fodder. Take the Hundred Years' War, which started in 1337 and became the ultimate example of how royal ambitions can turn the map of Europe into a bloodbath. It all began as a pure marketing stunt. The English king, Edward III, decided the French crown would look great on him. Officially, he was a vassal to Philip VI, but in reality, he was a guy with massive plans and zero patience. When two rulers cannot share a throne, they do not go to therapy. They send thousands of knights to figure out whose bloodline is cooler. But it was not just about pride. It was about basic control over highly profitable regions like Aquitaine, where wine flowed like water and taxes were collected faster than social media likes today. This conflict dragged on for 116 years. For the medieval person, it became an endless TV show where seasons change, the main characters die off, and the heirs are left to clean up the debt. 95. Think about the level of absurdity here. People were born, grew up, had kids, and died, completely unaware that someone at the top simply forgot to sign a truce. War became a lifestyle, and the old ideals of chivalry crashed into the brutal reality of the longbow, which turned elite knights into basic target practice. This was an era when diplomacy worked worse than dial-up internet in the middle of nowhere. Kings changed, tactics evolved, and peasants were just trying to survive while the powers that be played chess with human lives. We like to think of history as a neat timeline of dates, but the truth is, it is a chaotic mess of misunderstandings and a thirst for power. So what kept this machine running for so long? Why didn't anyone hit the brakes when the cost of winning clearly outgrew the value of the throne itself? The answer lies deep in human psychology. Status overrules common sense, and the inertia of our own minds is stronger than any logical argument. We are still walking this path, entirely unaware that many of our modern arguments are just echoes of those ancient battles where the rules of the game were written in blood, not ink. Are you ready to find out the exact point of no return? The moment a local family feud turned into a global catastrophe, echoing all the way to the present day? 7 centuries is not just a long time. It is an entire historical era where languages disappear, the climate changes, and whole species go extinct. Imagine if your startup project dragged on for 781 years. That is exactly how long the Reconquista lasted, turning the Iberian Peninsula into the longest endurance test in human history. It started in the year 718 with the Battle of Covadonga, and for the Christian kingdoms, it wasn't just a war for territory, it was a way of life. Imagine this. You wake up, eat breakfast, and go reclaim a couple of hills from your neighbor because that is exactly what your great-grandfather, your grandfather, and your father did. This wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon where instead of running shoes, you wore heavy armor, and the finish line was a sword planted in the ground of Granada in 1492. Today, we get depressed if our food delivery is 20 minutes late. We are addicted to instant results and measure success in quarterly reports. Keeping your focus on a goal that will only be reached by your great-great-grandchildren borders on insanity. But during the Reconquista, ideology was the ultimate antidepressant, turning centuries of struggle into a sacred, routine metaphysical workout. Defeats were just tests, and victories were just checkpoints. If someone pitched you a project today with an 800-year timeline, you would close the browser tab before the page even loaded. But medieval rulers thought in terms of eternity, not deadlines, building a unique engine of social mobilization where everyone felt like part of something fundamental. It was a long-running show where the writers weren't afraid to kill off the main characters, knowing the plot was bigger than the cast. The Reconquista taught Europe a terrifying lesson. Ideological conflict can be a more powerful motivator than any economic stimulus. We often ask ourselves where to find the motivation for long-term change. The answer is already carved into the stones of old Spanish fortresses. Is our modern civilization, hooked on instant gratification, even capable of this kind of willpower? Or are we the generation that gives up if we do not hit our target by the end of the fiscal year? History shows us that victory does not go to the fastest runner. It goes to the one who simply refuses to stop, even as eras, hairstyles, and the very nature of warfare completely change around them. This was a marathon spanning countless lifetimes, where every step was a conscious deposit toward a finale that none of the original players could have ever imagined. Ultimately, this exact ability to hold focus across centuries transformed scattered kingdoms into a massive global power that changed the face of the planet. But what happens when this ancient endurance mechanism collides with a modern reality where time moves faster than ever before? Are we ready to be part of something bigger than our own lifespans? Or are we permanently locked in the cage of our immediate desires? Now, imagine you decide to throw a massive house party, but instead of music and snacks, you invite neighbors who absolutely despise each other and hand them all loaded muskets. That was Central Europe in 1618, and it all kicked off with the defenestration of Prague, where Habsburg officials were literally thrown out of a third-story window straight into a pile of manure. This wasn't just extremely rude, it was the official starting gun for the 30 Years' War. At first, it looked like a local family dispute over who gets to pray as a Catholic and who as a Protestant. But very quickly, religion became a highly convenient cover for a massive business project. Once the professional mercenaries stepped in, war became the most profitable industry in the economy. Generals like Albrecht von Wallenstein figured out a very simple truth. War feeds war, and they turned looting into logistics. Burning down entire territories became a highly efficient strategy to fund an army, history's first private military company model. Investors poured money into military campaigns for dividends, paid out in captured land and ransom money, making it a startup built on extracting capital. The European economy was ripping at the seams, and whole regions were reduced to scorched deserts because feeding the soldiers cost more than the annual revenue of an entire nation. So why didn't anyone just press stop? The answer hurts because it is so modern. Systemic inertia. The conflict had become such a complex machine that stopping it threatened to collapse a massive financial pyramid, built on credit, collateral, and the promise of future victories. Monarchs became hostages to their own ambitions and their massive debts to the bankers funding the slaughter. War was no longer about faith. It was about the survival of a system that literally forgot how to function in peacetime. The breaking point finally hit in 1648, when the Peace of Westphalia completely rewrote the rules of the game. The world collectively realized that if they kept this up, nothing would be left of Europe except ashes and bills with no one left to pay them. So they invented the principle of state sovereignty, the idea that no one has the right to interfere in their neighbor's business, even if that neighbor prays to a different script. It was the first step toward the modern world order, where borders aren't just lines on a map, they are legal barriers. This entire chaotic mess, which started with bureaucrats flying out a window, birthed the diplomacy we know today. We are still living in a world engineered on the ruins of a war where faith was just spare change in a massive game for power and money. Did we really need to spill rivers of blood just to realize that sitting at a negotiating table is cheaper than paying the tab for an endless apocalypse? And now, picture this. You declare war, but you simply forget to end it for 300. In 1651, the Dutch, completely fed up with rebel pirates, officially declared war on the Isles of Scilly, a tiny archipelago off the coast of Britain. They did it in true Old Western style, fired a couple of warning shots toward the beach, and then happily sailed back home. And then everyone forgot about it. The diplomats, the kings, and even the islanders themselves forgot. For centuries, they just kept herding their sheep and catching fish, completely unaware that they were in a state of permanent, active warfare with one of the most powerful maritime empires in Europe. This wasn't a bloody drama. It was pure bureaucratic surrealism, where no one fired a shot and no one signed a surrender. But legally, the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly remained mortal enemies until 19. It was only when a local historian decided to dig through the archives that the world realized this war had lasted longer than the lifespan of most modern empires. The Dutch ambassador actually had to travel to the islands to sign a peace treaty, making it the most ridiculous conclusion to a military conflict in human history. Sounds hilarious, right? But take a look at your modern group chats, your work emails, or your family arguments. How many times have you declared war on a coworker over a stupid comment, and then just stopped talking to them without ever clearing the air? We leave these conflicts hanging, hoping that time will just magically erase the misunderstanding. We hoard our grudges exactly like those Dutch admirals hoarded forgotten documents in dusty folders. And as a result, we live in a state of permanent Cold War with our friends or partners, sometimes without even remembering what started the fight in the first place. The 335 Years' War teaches us something crucial. History isn't just about heroic deeds and massive disasters. It is also about collective amnesia. We have a habit of getting stuck in past arguments, turning them into a lifestyle. Human memory is highly selective. We remember the epic insults, but we completely forget how to close the loop. The Isles of Scilly prove that even the most absurd, deeply entrenched conflict can be solved with a single signature. You just have to remember that you aren't actually enemies. Maybe the best way to keep your life from turning into an endless TV series of unresolved tension is to occasionally dig into the archives of your own ego. 95. Because if an entire country can accidentally forget about a war for 3 centuries, just imagine how much dead weight you're dragging into tomorrow, strictly out of habit. Peace doesn't arrive when you run out of ammo. Peace happens when you finally find the strength to admit that the war was a mistake. History shouldn't just teach us how to fight, it should teach us how to put a hard stop to pointless arguments. It is time to close the tabs you have left open for way too long.